There's a type of man the military doesn't talk about. Not because he wasn't effective, but because he was too effective. A man so addicted to combat that peace felt like torture. So comfortable with death that life became the enemy. April 1969, Vietnam jungle. A radio crackles with a final transmission. I've got 'em right where I want 'em, surrounded from the inside. Then silence. Staff Sergeant Jerry Shriver was 27 years old. He carried 6 loaded pistols. He rejected evacuation. He smiled before charging into an enemy position he knew he wouldn't survive. This isn't a story about heroism. It's a story about what happens when a human being finds the one thing that makes them feel alive, and that thing is death. Everything you think you know about soldiers is wrong. We're taught that military training creates warriors, that boot camp transforms civilians into fighters, that medals and promotions measure a soldier's worth. But Jerry Shriver proved something else entirely. You can't create a man like him. You can only discover him and hope he's on your side. Because Shriver wasn't made by the military, he was revealed by it. The jungle didn't change him. It gave him permission to become what he already was. A man who didn't fight to survive. He survived the fight. The military didn't give Shriver purpose. Combat did. And when you understand why, you'll understand something disturbing about human nature that most people never confront. Some men aren't running from death. They're running toward it. Here's the truth they don't teach you about human behavior. We're told that self-preservation is the strongest instinct, that survival drives everything we do, that fear of death is universal. It's a lie. For a small percentage of humans, the strongest drive isn't survival, it's intensity. And nothing provides intensity like combat, like the moment when death is close enough to smell, when every sense sharpens, when time slows down and speeds up simultaneously, when you feel more alive than you've ever felt. Jerry Shriver was one of these men. And the tragedy of his story isn't that he died young, is that he couldn't live any other way. This isn't about courage or patriotism or duty. Those are the words we use to make sense of something we don't want to understand. This is about addiction, not to drugs or alcohol, to the neurochemical cocktail that floods the brain during life-threatening situations: adrenaline, dopamine, norepinephrine,
Endorphins. For most people, this cocktail triggers panic, the urge to flee, to find safety. For men like Shriver, it triggers euphoria, the feeling of finally being in the right place, of being exactly who they're meant to be. And once you've felt that, everything else becomes gray. To understand Jerry Shriver, you need to understand the warrior archetype and why modern society has no place for it. For most of human history, every tribe needed men like Shriver. Men who didn't hesitate, who ran toward danger instead of away from it, who could flip the switch from civilian to killer without psychological damage. These men kept the tribe safe. They hunted the predators. They defended the territory. They went into the dark places and came back. But they were never fully domesticated, never fully integrated into peaceful society. Because the traits that made them effective in combat made them disruptive in peace. Low fear response, high novelty seeking, impulsivity, dominance behavior, aggression that simmers just below the surface. In ancient times, these men were channeled into hunting and warfare, raiding parties and border defense. They had a role, a purpose. In modern society, we call them antisocial, reckless, dangerous. Shriver was born in 1941, small town, Florida, post-war America, an era of suburban normalcy and factory jobs and quiet desperation. Imagine being wired for combat in a world at peace, where the traits that would have made you a tribal protector make you unemployable, where the restlessness that would drive you to explore unknown territories gets you labeled as troubled. This is the cage that men like Shriver are born into. The tragedy isn't that the Vietnam War created men like him. The tragedy is that it gave them what they'd been searching for their entire lives, and then expected them to give it up when the war ended. Shriver enlisted young. The military recognized what he was immediately, not through tests or evaluations, through observation. He volunteered for everything: airborne school, special forces, the most dangerous assignments, not for recognition or promotion, for the experience itself. This is the pattern. Warriors self-select. They gravitate toward the fire. By the time Shriver reached Vietnam in 1966, he'd found his calling: macv-sog, Military Assistance Command Vietnam Studies and Observation Group. The name was deliberately boring. The reality was anything but.
Cross-border raids into Laos and Cambodia. Reconnaissance missions deep behind enemy lines. Unconventional warfare against an enemy that didn't follow conventional rules. Selection was brutal. Attrition rate over 50%. Only the most capable, most psychologically resilient operators made the cut. Shriver didn't just make the cut, he thrived. Here's what's crucial to understand. Most soldiers, even elite ones, view combat as necessary evil, something to endure, something to survive so you can go home. Shriver viewed combat as home. His teammates noticed immediately. While other operators counted days until rotation home, Shriver extended and extended and extended again. Over 1,000 days in Vietnam. 3.5 years of continuous combat operations. Most of that time deep in the jungle with his Montagnard tribesmen hunting North Vietnamese and Viet Cong. This isn't dedication, it's obsession. When forced to take mandatory leave, Shriver didn't rest. He traveled to other special forces camps and joined their operations. Uninvited, unpaid. Simply because the idea of not fighting was unbearable. Think about what that means. The thing most soldiers desperately want, peace and safety, was torture for Shriver. And the thing most people fear above all else, imminent death in combat, was his natural state. This is the inverted reality of the warrior archetype.
Like refusing evacuation when surrounded, and telling your commanders you've got the enemy surrounded from the inside. Most people hear that and think it's bravado, tough guy posturing. It's not. It's a completely different relationship with death. For Shriver, being surrounded by the enemy wasn't a worst-case scenario. It was exactly where he wanted to be. Maximum intensity, maximum focus, the purest form of combat. Another example. Shriver once took mandatory rest and recuperation leave, R&R, the sacred break that every soldier cherishes, time away from the war. Shriver spent his R&R at a different Special Forces camp, joining their patrols, fighting alongside strangers, because rest felt like dying slowly. This is addiction, pure and simple. Not to violence, but to the state of consciousness that violence creates. His teammates called him Mad Dog. The name fit, not because he was crazy, but because he operated on instinct, pure, unfiltered response to stimuli. No hesitation between perception and action. In the NCO club, Shriver would sit alone, drinking beer, waiting for the next mission. Other soldiers avoided him, not from fear, but from recognition that he was fundamentally different. One teammate said, "Shriver convinced me that for the rest of my life, I would not go into a bar and cross someone I didn't know." This is the aura of a true predator, the energy that says, "I'm comfortable with violence in ways you cannot comprehend." But here's what complicates the narrative. Shriver wasn't a psychopath.
Psychopaths lack empathy. They don't bond. They use people as objects. Shriver bonded intensely with his Montagnard fighters, indigenous tribesmen from the Vietnamese highlands. He lived with them, ate with them, slept in their barracks. He spent his own money buying food and supplies for their families. He learned their language, their customs. He earned their absolute loyalty because they recognized he would die for them. And he did. This is the paradox of the warrior archetype, capable of extreme violence toward enemies and extreme loyalty toward brothers. The capacity for both exists in the same person, activated by different contexts. Shriver also had a German shepherd named Klaus, adopted from Taiwan. That dog was one of the few things outside of combat that Shriver cared about. When he learned that some NCOs had force-fed Klaus beer as a prank, Shriver walked into their club with a loaded revolver, demanded to know who was responsible.
No one admitted it, because they understood he would shoot them. This is selective empathy, fierce protection of those within his circle, complete indifference or hostility toward those outside it. The Montagnards loved him. Klaus loved him. His teammates respected him. Everyone else was either irrelevant or a potential threat. But here's the layer most people miss. Jerry Shriver wasn't running from something, he was running toward something. Most troubled soldiers are escaping trauma, poverty, broken homes. They join the military for structure, for belonging, for escape. Shriver wasn't escaping anything. He was searching for the one environment where his particular wiring made sense. Think about what modern society demands. Sit still, follow rules, suppress aggression, delay gratification, conform to social expectations. For most people, these demands are manageable, mildly annoying but acceptable. For men wired like Shriver, these demands are suffocating. Every instinct says move, act, dominate, explore. And society says no, sit down, be quiet, get in line. The military, especially special operations, doesn't eliminate these demands, but it channels them. It gives men like Shriver a target, a purpose, permission to be what they are. And Vietnam took that permission to the extreme. macv-sog operated with minimal oversight, classified missions, plausible deniability. Operators made decisions in the field that would require general approval in conventional units. This is freedom, real freedom, not the political concept, the operational reality of making life and death decisions without bureaucratic interference. For Shriver, Vietnam wasn't hell. It was the only place that made sense. His teammates noticed he changed when forced to return stateside, became irritable, restless, drank more. The mandatory R&R broke him worse than combat ever did. Because combat gave him clarity, purpose, the elimination of ambiguity. In the jungle, things are simple. Survive or die. Kill or be killed. Protect your men or lose them. No politics, no office dynamics, no social performance. Just pure, unfiltered reality. And then you're yanked back to the world, where nothing makes sense, where people care about trivial things, where the skills that kept you alive are not just useless, but actively problematic. How do you reintegrate after that? You don't. Shriver tried. He'd return to base, follow regulations for a while, then he'd sneak out and join another unit heading into the jungle.
This is the behavior of an addict, not a patriot, not a hero. An addict who's found the only thing that makes life tolerable.
And here's the devastating part. Everyone around him knew. His commanders knew. His teammates knew. They watched him extend his tours, volunteer for the most dangerous missions, take risks that were objectively unnecessary. And they let him, because he was effective, because the war needed men like him, because stopping him would require confronting something uncomfortable about the nature of warfare. We need men willing to die. We dress it up with words like duty and honor and sacrifice. But the reality is simpler and darker. Some men need to be in mortal danger to feel alive, and wars need those men. The tragedy is what happens when the war ends. April 24th, 1969. Shriver had been in Vietnam for over 3 years, more combat time than almost anyone in macv-sog. He'd survived countless missions that should have killed him. And something had changed. His teammates noticed it. He was quieter than usual, more introspective. He'd started talking about leaving, about finally rotating home. But there was no conviction in his voice, just resignation. Before his final mission, Shriver turned to a friend and said, "Take care of my boy." He meant Klaus, the dog he'd protected with a loaded gun, the only living thing outside his Montagnard fighters that mattered to him. This is the statement of a man who knows, not fears, knows. The mission was a raid on a North Vietnamese airfield near Quan Loy. B-52s had softened the target. Now macv-sog would go in and clear out whatever remained. Standard operation, except nothing was ever standard with macv-sog. As soon as the helicopters landed, everything went wrong. Machine gun fire from concealed positions, grenades from hidden bunkers. Shriver's platoon was pinned down immediately, outnumbered 6-1 by his estimate. Most commanders would call for immediate extraction, cut losses, live to fight another day. Shriver did the opposite. He radioed that he would flank the enemy positions. Then he gathered his Montagnards, smiled at them, nodded, and charged, straight into the machine gun fire. This is the moment that separates warriors from soldiers. Soldiers calculate odds. Warriors eliminate calculation. Shriver and his men threw grenades, fired on the move, closed the distance that should have been impossible to cross. And then he disappeared into the tree line.
This is the behavior of an addict. Not a patriot, not a hero. An addict who's found the only thing that makes life tolerable. And here's the devastating part. Everyone around him knew. His commanders knew. His teammates knew. They watched him extend his tours, volunteer for the most dangerous missions, take risks that were objectively unnecessary. And they let him because he was effective, because the war needed men like him, because stopping him would require confronting something uncomfortable about the nature of warfare. We need men willing to die. We dress it up with words like duty and honor and sacrifice, but the reality is simpler and darker. Some men need to be in mortal danger to feel alive, and wars need those men. The tragedy is what happens when the war ends. April 24th, 1969. Shriver had been in Vietnam for over 3 years, more combat time than almost anyone in macv-sog. He'd survived countless missions that should have killed him. And something had changed. His teammates noticed it. He was quieter than usual, more introspective. He'd started talking about leaving, about finally rotating home. But there was no conviction in his voice, just resignation. Before his final mission,
Shriver turned to a friend and said, "Take care of my boy." He meant Klaus, the dog he had protected with a loaded gun, the only living thing outside his Montagnard fighters that mattered to him. This is the statement of a man who knows, not fears, knows. The mission was a raid on a North Vietnamese airfield near Quan Loi. B-52s had softened the target. Now macv-sog would go in and clear out whatever remained. Standard operation, except nothing was ever standard with macv-sog. As soon as the helicopters landed, everything went wrong. Machine gun fire from concealed positions, grenades from hidden bunkers. Shriver's platoon was pinned down immediately, outnumbered 6-1 by his estimate. Most commanders would call for immediate extraction, cut losses, live to fight another day. Shriver did the opposite. He radioed that he would flank the enemy positions. Then he gathered his Montagnards, smiled at them, nodded, and charged, straight into the machine gun fire. This is the moment that separates warriors from soldiers. Soldiers calculate odds. Warriors eliminate calculation. Shriver and his men threw grenades, fired on the move, closed the distance that should have been impossible to cross. And then he disappeared into the tree line. The last anyone saw of Staff Sergeant Jerry Michael Shriver, he was advancing toward an enemy position he couldn't possibly survive, armed with an Uzi submachine gun and the absolute certainty that this was exactly where he belonged. His body was never recovered. North Vietnamese radio claimed they'd captured and killed him. No proof was ever provided. Cleanup teams searched for weeks, found nothing. He was less than 3 weeks from the end of his third tour, 27 years old, officially listed as missing in action. The Secretary of the Army closed his file in 1974, posthumously awarded him a second Silver Star, promoted him to Master Sergeant. Klaus, the German Shepherd, outlived him. So what does Jerry Shriver's story actually tell us about human nature? It tells us that the traits we value in peacetime and the traits we need in wartime are not just different, they're often opposite. Caution is a virtue in civilian life. Recklessness is required in combat. Patience is rewarded in peacetime. Aggression is necessary in war. Long-term thinking builds societies. Short-term intensity wins battles. And the men who possess the warrior traits, the Jerry Shrivers of the world, they don't fit anywhere else. We create them through genetics and early experiences we don't fully understand. We discover them through war. We use them until the war ends. And then we abandon them. Because what do you do with a man who can't turn it off, who can't reintegrate, who found his purpose in the one place society can't sustain? Shriver never had to face that question. He died doing exactly what he was built to do. In some terrible way, that might be the kindest outcome. Because the alternative is decades of trying to fit into a world that has no place for you, of feeling the restlessness, the emptiness, the knowledge that you were most alive when you were closest to death. Many Vietnam veterans faced this struggle, the struggle to reintegrate, the feeling that something crucial was left behind in the jungle. But for most, it was survivable. They built lives, raised families, found new purposes. For men like Shriver, there is no new purpose. Combat isn't what they do, it's what they are. And when you take that away, what's left? This is why the warrior archetype is tragic. Not because warriors die young,
but because the alternative is worse. Living long enough to become obsolete, to feel your skills decay, to watch the intensity fade, to spend decades remembering when you felt truly alive. Shriver avoided that fate. At 27, charging into enemy fire with a smile on his face, he was exactly who he'd always been. No compromise, no adaptation, no slow fade into irrelevance. Pure warrior until the end. Here's what makes people uncomfortable about Jerry Shriver. He proves that heroism and mental health are not the same thing. We want our warriors to be stable, balanced, capable of violence when necessary, but fundamentally normal underneath. Shriver was never normal. His normality was combat. Everything else was the aberration. This challenges how we think about military service. We frame it as sacrifice, duty, doing something difficult for the greater good. But for some men, military service isn't sacrifice, it's self-actualization. They're not doing it for you, they're doing it for themselves. And that's uncomfortable, because it means we're not just using them, we're enabling an addiction we don't fully understand and can't control. The military doesn't create warriors like Shriver. It discovers them, trains them, points them at the enemy. And as long as there's an enemy, everything works. These men have a role, a purpose, a place where their particular pathology becomes an asset. But what happens when there's no enemy, when the war ends? We're seeing it now, decades after Vietnam. Warriors who never found peace, who self-destructed slowly. Suicide, addiction, incarceration, homelessness. Not because they were broken by war, but because war was the only thing that made them whole. And society has no answer for this, no system to handle men who are wired for something we only need episodically. So we memorialize them, build monuments, thank them for their service, and quietly hope they stay away. Because the truth is, we need men like Jerry Shriver when the shooting starts, and we're terrified of them when it stops. They're too intense, too unpredictable, too comfortable with violence. In the jungle, these traits save lives. In society, they destroy them. And there's no switch to flip between the two states, no reintegration program that actually works for the extreme cases. Shriver knew this. On some level, he understood that returning home meant a slow death, a gradual suffocation as he tried to be something he wasn't. So he stayed, extended again and again, until the choice was made for him. 27 years old, surrounded from the inside, exactly where he wanted to be. This is the darkest truth about warriors.
For some of them, death in combat isn't the tragedy, it's the mercy. Staff Sergeant Jerry Michael Shriver left behind more than medals. He left behind a question we still haven't answered. What do we owe the men we create? Because, make no mistake, men like Shriver are created. Not by boot camp or special forces training, but by genetic lottery and early experiences that shape neural pathways in ways we don't fully understand. They're born with certain predispositions: low fear response, high novelty seeking, comfort with violence. And then life either suppresses these traits or amplifies them. For Shriver, Vietnam amplified them to the maximum, gave him 3.5 years of pure intensity, let him be fully himself in ways civilian life never would.
and then expected him to just stop. This is the covenant we don't talk about. Society needs warriors, but only sometimes, and only in controlled doses. The men who embody the warrior archetype most completely, the Shrivers of the world, they can't be controlled, can't be turned on and off like a switch. They're all or nothing, and nothing means death, either quick in combat or slow in peacetime. Shriver chose quick, or rather, quick chose him. His legacy isn't just his medal count. It's the uncomfortable mirror he holds up to society. We want violence to be something good men do reluctantly, in defense of principles, with regret and introspection afterward. Shriver proves that sometimes violence is what certain men are, not what they do in extremis, but what they seek out, what makes them feel alive. And we don't know what to do with that truth, so we sanitize it, call it heroism, patriotism, duty. We avoid asking the harder questions, like, was Shriver fighting for freedom? Or was freedom just the excuse he needed to do what he wanted to do anyway? Was he serving his country? Or was his country serving him by providing an outlet for drives that would be criminal in peacetime? These aren't comfortable questions, but they're honest ones. And Jerry Shriver deserves honesty more than hagiography. He was a warrior, pure, undiluted, exactly what the military needed in the jungles of Vietnam. He was also a man who couldn't exist outside of combat, who needed danger like other men need oxygen. Both things are true, and the tension between them is what makes his story matter. You're probably not Jerry Shriver. You're probably not a warrior archetype looking for a war. But his story reveals something universal about human nature that applies to everyone.
We're all searching for the thing that makes us feel most alive. For Shriver, it was combat. For you, it might be something entirely different. Creation, competition, risk, connection. But the pattern is the same. You're searching for the environment where your wiring makes sense, where your particular combination of traits is an asset instead of a liability. Most people never find it. They spend their lives feeling slightly out of place, slightly off, going through the motions that don't quite fit. Some people find it and lose it, get downsized from the job that defined them, lose the relationship that made them whole, watch their children grow up and leave. And a very few people find it and can't leave it, like Shriver. They've discovered their purpose, and everything else becomes irrelevant. This is the blessing and curse of self-knowledge. Once you know what makes you feel alive, everything else is just marking time. The question is, what do you do with that knowledge? Shriver's answer was extreme. Stay in the one place that made sense. Extend until extension wasn't possible anymore. Die doing the thing he loved. Most of us can't or won't go that far. We compromise. We adapt. We find ways to integrate our truest selves with the demands of society. But there's a cost to that compromise, a slow dimming of intensity, a gradual acceptance that you'll never quite feel the way you felt in those peak moments. And this is where Shriver's story becomes a mirror. Are you living or just surviving? Are you in the place where your particular wiring makes sense? Or are you suppressing it for the sake of conformity? Are you compromising toward mediocrity? Or fighting to protect the parts of yourself that matter most? These aren't easy questions, because the honest answers are often uncomfortable. Maybe you're in the wrong career, wrong relationship, wrong city, wrong life.
Maybe you've been playing it safe for so long you've forgotten what risk feels like. Maybe you've surrounded yourself with people who want you to be normal, when normal for you is a prison. Shriver never compromised, and he paid the price. 27 years old, missing in action, presumed dead. But he also never lived a day feeling like he was in the wrong place. The question is, which price would you rather pay? The price of intensity with early death, or the price of safety with slow suffocation? There's no right answer, but there is an honest one. And whatever your answer is, it reveals something fundamental about who you are and what you value.
Shriver valued intensity over longevity, clarity over comfort, purpose over safety. You might value different things. That's fine. But at least be honest about what they are. Because the worst fate isn't dying young in pursuit of what matters. It's dying old, having never pursued it at all.